this year, I set out on my dream to make my first video game, and in 3 months, I did it. I made Radish Retail basically a clicking simulator. I think we can do better than that though. I think it's time we step up our game into the next dimension, 3D. Hi, I'm Marbellos, a new-time game developer who is still learning the basics of what it takes to make a game. In only 24 hours, I'll be attempting to create my first 3D game in Godot. If there's anything I've learned in my short time developing, it's that anything is possible, right? First things first, where do we start? Most developers come into this stuff with a plan for what they want to create, but I'm no game designer, so I guess whatever I come up with on the way is what we stick with. Using this tutorial by Bramwell, I was able to learn how to create my very own 3D environment in the engine. This marks the first step to the project. I say we're off to a pretty good start. Now it's time to create a floor that can detect collisions, which seems pretty useful in an endless void. I then got to work to create my own player character. It seems like Godot offers two types of options for what you can use when creating a character, the rigid body and character body nodes. The character node allows you to have more control over your movement, allowing you to create precise scripts to make things match exactly what you want. The rigid node, on the other hand, offers less of this creativity with the exchange of a base that already has physics built into it. Since I haven't yet tinkered around with 3D physics, I'm gonna opt for the rigid body. I ended up regretting this in the future since the rigid body node was harder for me to script. I was already locked into my decision though, so I had no other option but to double down with my choice. Anyways, back to the character. For now, I'm going to be using a capsule to represent our player, since I don't really have any models to use for now. This won't stay this way though. Now it's time to get into the good part, scripting. This is where the magic happens and is what allows us to move the player in our scene. First, I created a new process function under Delta. This can be a confusing concept, but in summary, Delta basically refers to the time that has passed since the last rendered frame. I then created a new input that simply detects whenever the up arrow is pressed. Additionally, I added a calculation using the rigids node for applying central force. In this force, we allow the up arrow to move the character forward while allowing it to speed up as the key is pressed. All of this is multiplied by delta to account for frame drops. Now, when we test this out, we get a good look at how effectively the script works. Not very good. With this movement, I'm left with only being able to move forward using the arrow key. Luckily, Godot allows you to add custom inputs to the engine for use in your own scripts. My best bet was to redo my script so that I could have better keybinds than simply the up arrow. Luckily, there's not too much to fix. With this, our character can now move in 4 directions on our plane. Moving on to probably the most boring part, we got the camera and camera controls. Attaching the camera directly to the player allows it to follow the beam wherever I go. The hard part comes when allowing this camera to rotate around our player character. Long story short, this took me a good amount of time to figure out, but I learned some new things that are useful when trying to achieve a rotating camera, like a clamp to make sure our camera stops moving once it reaches the top and bottom of the player character. After some hard work, I finally got the camera up and running, but now I have a new problem. The directional input for the player is still dependent on the global direction north, which I defined as forward. Instead of this, we want movement to be dependent on the direction of the camera to allow W to move the player forward no matter which direction they're facing. Luckily, I can easily use the transform property of our character to locate where it is in 3D space. I can then use this to see which way is forward from the character's position. With that little change, we finally have our movement finished. Now we can look around and move wherever we want to go. I think it's time we work on an actual game now. First, let's find a main character who can replace our capsule fellow. I took the files of this little dude and imported it into Godot to replace the bean we had before, but I didn't even know what this was meant to be, so I ended up replacing it with a snowman instead. After a bit of tinkering, I was able to get the texture on as well. With this, we have our character. Next up on the to-do list is to allow our snowman to jump. Unluckily for me, I made the dumb decision earlier to make my character using the rigid body node. Because of this, finding out a way to make my character jump was just not possible for me. I tried a number of different solutions, but to no avail. After a bit of trial and error, Godot even ended up crashing. Everything continued to not work until I simply applied an upward force on the y-axis using my movement script. This means I have something that looks like a jump, but in reality it is a flying snowman. I guess we just gotta make it work since I don't know any way to fix it. Now we need to make the snowman face the direction that the player is trying to go in. I tried attaching the script inside of a physics process, but this ended up breaking my camera, so I gave it to ChatGPT in hopes that it could somehow fix it, and by some way it was actually able to work. I think we're at a pretty good spot to safely say we have our movement in the game, so that's something off the checklist. Our next order of business is to turn this game into something fun to actually play. Something about mindlessly running around as a snowman doesn't pose as very fun. First thing I got to work on was creating a HUD for the player to track their stats. What will the HUD be used for? Tracking collectibles. But we're not quite there yet. First, I gotta label up in a canvas layer that shows the player how many snowballs they have. Right now, that's 0, so let's fix that. I created a script that manages how many collectibles the player has. I think it's reasonable to make the collectible snowballs. I whipped up a quick snowball that the player can interact with. I don't know why it looks so odd in the editor, but it looks normal in the game, so that's all that matters. Next, I need to allow the snowball to detect being collided with. I tried doing this using an Area 3D node to act as a detection zone, and when the player is detected inside the zone, the snowball will add the score and destroy itself. This took some trial and error, and I eventually settled on a solution using Godot's group feature that allows me to conveniently assign different parts into a group that defines the player. Lastly, I allowed my script to update the text accordingly to the score. After I got this working, I duplicated a couple of the snowballs to see if I was able to collect more than one, and I could. With this, we officially have the most watered down experience that can technically be considered a video game. Lastly, we need to cram in some more essentials to top off the project. This includes a title screen, an actual map, and some music. Let's start with the title screen. I simply made a new scene that allows you to click play and nothing else really. To spice up the menu, I also went ahead and made the game its very own logo. The official name of the project is now Snowball Pursuit. I also created a backdrop for that extra effect. The end product ended up looking like a scam website, but I think it perfectly catches the magic of the game. Next, I found some copyright-free Christmas music and popped it into the background. Now you no longer collect snowballs in dead silence. I also crafted up a snow texture for the floor to make it look less like a plane flying in the sky. Somehow in this process I broke my snowball tracker, so I guess I'll have to ignore the broken counter for now. I tried adding in a sound for collecting snowballs to make up for my broken counter, but I wasn't able to get that working either. To try and get something working, I decided to finally work on the map. I imported a pine tree model to fill up the map some more. I don't really know how to apply multiple textures in Godot, so I settled with a completely green tree. Before working on the entire map, I also quickly made a rock model for walls. Now comes the best part, the map design. I tried my best to make a map using Godot's kinda clunky 3D tools. You can tell by the product that I'm no map designer, but what we have works for now. After a bit of grinding, I was left with the final product. With that, the game is now finished, marking my first ever 3D project using the Godot engine. Let's take one last look at everything I've spent the last 24 hours working on. Thank you all for sticking around and watching the video. If you made it this far, comment down below cookie for a free cookie. I'll be heading out now, so I'll see you all in the next one. See ya.